Hi, I'm Dan James from Parental Alienation UK, and I wanted to just firstly applaud Philip Davies MP for Shipley for his brilliant articulation of the amendments that he'd like to see of the Domestic Abuse Bill. He raised three key points. One, which was to recognise all victims of domestic violence and abuse. And that means including men, because it isn't just women that suffer this hideous crime. Men do too. A third of all victims are men. And that is not a gendered crime. You cannot say that with almost 800,000 men who are victims, that is then gendered, because that is the equivalent of Wembley Stadium to full capacity, full of male victims, times 9. And the reason that that is so important is that if we wish to protect children who are in these households, these chaotic, dysfunctional households, they cannot be protected if we only address female victims. We care about all child victims, and to disregard male victims perversely leaves those out of this equation for protection. It's not acceptable. Secondly, he's talked about recognising parental alienation as a form of domestic abuse. It unequivocally is, because the behaviours of domestic abuse, principally psychological abuse and coercive control, which are rampant in domestic abuse cases, are also rampant in parental alienation cases. Thirdly, he has raised the issue of false allegations. I was reading a report recently that was talking about domestic abuse, where parental alienation was a counterclaim for and used as a silver bullet. Well, similarly, that same expression is used for those who go to court in order to be able to spend time with their own children, because this is what we're talking about. It's not contact. It's parenting time to maintain a close, loving relationship with their own children, and domestic abuse claims have been brought against them, which further eradicates them from the child's life. That's also a silver bullet. Now, unfortunately, it is true that people can and do lie, particularly when it comes to something as explosive as our own children. And in a case of a genuinely protective parent, then it is perfectly understandable that you would want to make sure that any contact is supervised. But that's not what we're talking about here. In terms of parental alienation, what we're talking about are parents. They could be mothers or fathers. This is not a gender issue, whatever we're being told by Women's Aid and Refuge, etc. It happens to both men and women, and we need to be really clear about that. Basically, the accusation of domestic abuse or mental illness or a whole range of perverse reasons why that parent is incapable of parenting their own child can be brought in to prevent them from seeing their own children when they're actually loving, safe, normal range parents. And it can take a long time for those allegations to be heard. It's supposed to be listed within days. It isn't. And the frustrations that frustrate those who help domestic abuse victims are equally true in parental alienation cases. Both of them need urgent attention, urgent court time, and need to be fully fact-found, because false allegations of either kind wreck lives. They can wreck reputations, wreck careers, and wreck the relationship that a parent has with their children. And it's really important that we address the elephant in the room here. I want to be very clear, and it's not something I make a habit of talking about, and it's only since I've started working in this space on parental alienation that I've had to address it. What we are not saying here, in our support with Philip Davies, recognising all victims, is to take anything away from female mums and children who are victims of domestic abuse. It is imperative that you get the support and the help and the care. No one would take anything away from you. When we're referencing male victims, we are not trying to do so by taking anything away from you. And I say this as a survivor. I know what it's like to be in a relationship where your life, your sanity, your very being, your self-confidence is under threat. I understand that very well. I was a 17-year-old mother who was almost dead by 18. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. I'm not a victim. My life is good. But I can remember that time if I have to think about it. And I absolutely believe it is imperative that if you're in that position, you are protected. We've run campaigns to address the scourge of domestic abuse. We are on your side. What we have an issue with is that in some cases there are mothers, and sometimes fathers, who bring false allegations of domestic abuse in order to prevent their partner from seeing and loving and continuing the relationship with their own child. And in some cases, some of our members have had not just 1, 2, 3 false allegations. Some of them have had over 80. And that renders me, as a survivor, incandescent. That is a use of public funds, police time, resources that are stolen from you as a genuine victim and taken for those who are gaming this system. That is completely different. And so it's essential that false allegations are addressed, because are we not a compassionate society that actually cares about all our inhabitants, not just females? And I say that as a female, as a feminist, as a survivor. But what we're seeing is a whole load of misinformation, gender rhetoric, damaging so-called research that's being presented to position PA as only a means for abusive fathers to use in court. Nonsense. We have hundreds of mothers who are similarly afflicted. And Dr. Adrienne Burnetts has recently done a blog for Women's Aid where she talks about those women who are affected by parental alienation by a father are genuine victims of domestic abuse. However, when the reverse is true and men are affected by women who are perpetuating what is effectively an attachment dysfunction on their own child, which is really serious. This isn't just contact. This is interfering with the child's innate biological attachment bond with one of their own parents. So they are seriously, psychologically harming them. Then it isn't domestic abuse. It is something else entirely. I think the expression was it's apples and pears. I'm sorry. You can't have it both ways. It is domestic abuse, and it is absolutely serious. And all victims of abuse must be protected. And I cannot, in all consciousness, stand by and allow misleading rhetoric to go out and damage the chances, the futures of impressionable little children who are being damaged in the most unnatural, devastating way, where they are brought up to hate, to reject, to be cruel, to dismiss. What are we doing as a society when we allow this to happen? And to castigate those who are getting into this space to help those who are suffering as those jumping on the bandwagon is equally disingenuous. But the big elephant in the room is this, and I have to say it, and I'm going to say it. The big elephant in the room is that the report that keeps being alluded to, Safe Contact Saves Lives, Child First, 19 homicides, is at best disingenuous, because it cites 19 homicides in 12 families where fathers on contact killed their children. Dreadful stories, awful, should never have happened. It shames us that that was allowed to happen. We're not saying that that isn't really important to bring to the attention of government. And on the basis of that report, there were 120 MPs that rightly supported that in following through with better contact so that those who were disordered and damaged did not get unsupervised contact with their children, which is absolutely the right thing to do. I went through to court to get supervised contact. So I understand the imperative of protecting victims and particularly vulnerable children. However, this report searched the serious case reviews over a 10-year period, And that's where the 19 homicides came from, culpable child homicides. However, in a shorter period between 2007 and 15, there were actually, according to the serious case reviews, 330 culpable child homicides. And more children were killed by mothers than by biological fathers or other male partners. Now, this has to be said, and I'm not saying that women are more dangerous than men. I'm not. There are many reasons why someone may be so desperate and have such severe mental health issues that their children end up dead. What I'm saying is this is being positioned as a means of eradicating fathers. The contact at all costs propaganda is actually very, very misleading, because children need contact at all costs if they're with a safe, loving, affectionate parent. They need that. We're not talking about contact. We're talking about the continuation of their attachment bond, because all the evidence shows, Professor Nielsen, 34 studies, that children that have at least 35% time with their other parent, their non-resident parent, do as well as children in intact families. How amazing would that be? Who could not wish that for our children? That those children in post-separation landscape could do as well as children in intact families on all the key performance indicators we would want to see. Who would not want that? So this is really important whilst the domestic abuse bill is being heard, because what I'm hearing is that all men are potentially abusive and dangerous. And I don't know when that came out, but as a feminist, as a survivor, and as someone who I like to think has compassion and cares passionately about children's safety, I find it incredibly damaging. And nobody is asking the question. So thank you, Philip Davies, for your insightful recommendations that domestic abuse is recognised for all victims.